Lizzy here with a fall-themed shaker card using some of the very awesome new goodies from Lawn Fawn. Today I'll be mainly using the new Sweater Weather collection. I'll be using the stamp set and coordinating dies, as well as this awesome 6x6 paper pack, which is full of beautiful fall-themed patterns. I really love it. I'll also be using some of my favorite of the new dies, specifically the stitched hillside border dies and the small and large stitched rectangle stackable dies. So before we get started, I just wanted to point out how the large and small rectangle dies complement each other. In order to make the shaker frame for the card, I'll actually be using a die from the small set and a die from the large set. So you can see how the small rectangle fits perfectly within the larger one so that you'd get the same size frame cut every time, which is great because it totally takes all the guesswork out of aligning the dies. And if you were to get both packages, you can see you'd have every size rectangle you'd need. So just something to think about if you weren't quite sure which die set to get. You can just see kind of how they all compare. So anyway, just something to think about. To get started, I'll die cut all the elements that I'll need to create the shaker panel. First up is the frame for the front of the card, which is cut from a piece of orange pattern paper from the Sweater Weather paper pack. And next I'll use the larger die to cut the back panel out of some white cardstock. Then I'll die cut a piece of acetate using the large die as well. And while I have my big shot out, I'll die cut a tree using the Sweater Weather dies. And lastly, I'll cut a hill using the stitched border die to help create my scene. And as you can see, the great thing about the border dies is that they're long enough to fit the width of the pattern paper. So you have a choice of what part of the hill you'd like to use if your project like this one is smaller than 6 inches. So I'm just using the large rectangle die to figure out exactly what part of the hill I'd like to use, and then I can tape it into place and run that through my big shot. Okay, so here we have all the pieces we just die cut: the back panel, the hill, the tree, and the front of the shaker, the acetate, and the frame. You can see how they will all layer up in the end. So now I'll be working on the inside of the shaker. I'll be temporarily adhering the tree onto the back panel so I know exactly where to stamp the coordinating leaf image. First, I'll stamp the image with yellow ink, and then I'll stamp over it with orange ink to create a gradient of color, just to add some fun detail to the card. So before I stamp, I'm just going to use a damp paper towel to dab off some of the ink from the tips of the leaves. And because this is a clear stamp, it can easily line up the leaves to stamp over the original image. And as you can see, you get a great gradient effect. I think it's just a fun detail for the card. So to add a little extra sparkle to the card, I'll be using some Delicata Gold ink to splatter over the background panel, which is why I didn't permanently adhere the tree to start with. And the reason I'm doing this is I don't have any gold spray in and of itself, so I just make my own. And as you can see, it's super easy. Just spread a little ink on the craft mat, spritz it with water, and flick the color with a paintbrush. So I just took that off camera, quickly zapped the background with my heat tool just to dry up the splattered ink, and now I can finally permanently adhere the tree. Oh, and after I had finished adhering the tree, I totally forgot to adhere my hill first, so I had to do some quick card surgery and peel up the base of the tree with my craft knife. And thankfully, it was liquid glue, so it was no problem to do. And I could just quickly slide that hill right underneath the tree and flatten everything down. Okay, now for my favorite part of the card, creating all the leaves that will be the actual shaker bits. So I'll be using this small leaf image, but first I'll use the coordinating die to die cut a bunch of leaves out of white cardstock. You can see I die cut a whole bunch of them. And then I'll use the same yellow and orange ink as earlier to stamp the image directly onto the die cut. I think in this particular instance, the die cut first, stamp second approach is much easier and less time consuming than doing it the other way around. So I just stamped some of the images in yellow, some in orange, and some in that same gradient that we did the leaves that were on the tree. Now the last step of creating the shaker element is to adhere everything together. I'll be using tape runner to adhere the acetate to the frame. And I'm sorry that my hair is blowing in the frame. Even though this is a fall themed card, it's still quite hot where I am, so I have an overhead fan running. And I'll also be using 2 layers of foam tape behind the frame to pop it up so that the leaves have enough room to move within the space. You can see they all shake nicely. So that is the shaker panel for our card. Okay, so to make the card, I've cut a piece of craft colored cardstock to a standard size top folding card and picked a piece of pattern paper, the pretty quilt paper, to be the background of the card. And then I've also picked a piece of yellow dot paper from the same paper pack for my sentiment. So I'll be stamping the banner from one of the older stamp sets, Home Sweet Home. It's actually just the right size to fit my sentiment, so that's why I chose it. And I stamped it a little bit close to the edge, so I'm just making sure that I'll have enough room to die cut it out. And as you can see, that happy fall sentiment fits perfectly within that banner. So I can just stamp that with the same crisp black ink and run that through my die cutting machine. Okay, now I can finally assemble the whole part of the card. So I'm just using some tape runner to adhere that pattern paper to the card base. And then I will use some liquid glue to adhere the shaker panel on. And that's my cat saying hello. And once that's finally centered, I will adhere the sentiment with a combination of liquid glue and foam tape. And since I doubled up the foam tape on the frame, I will double up the foam tape on the sentiment as well. So I'll use that on the bottom and some liquid glue on the top. Alright, here's the finished card. I hope you enjoyed this video on making a fall themed shaker card using the new Sweater Weather collection from Lawn Fawn. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next video.